I really like shooting guns. It's just, I went shooting one time. I had like a Groupon for like a shooting range, and I went, and I was like, hell yeah, it's a lot of fun.
America is full of guns. It's not exactly breaking news, but who is wielding them these days might be a little more surprising. In Philadelphia, just southwest of New York, we met up with the local chapter of the Socialist Rifle Association, a left-wing group that teaches gun safety and gun use to members of the local community. It has lots of LGBTQ members. It has lots of non-white members. It says that what it is doing is community defence. And that's not all it does. Its members have also been involved with disaster relief after natural disasters in other parts of the country, as well as drug harm reduction and giving out free food to the local community. And so with the giant papier-mâché head of the famous anarchist Emma Goldman in the background, we asked them why they felt the need to get armed and whether or not this might be the new face of mutual aid.
There is a sort of like worst case scenario that, you know, these guns are so prolific that it's better to have one than to not if you're responsible and you're a member of the community and you're looking out for people. I think a lot of right-wing gun culture is just glorifying violence and actually helping people. We've had members of the SRA go down to North Carolina to help out during the hurricanes or after the hurricanes. I don't think showing up with guns is the best way to do that, but the other side does, so kind of it's better to have it and not need it sort of thing.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of the radical movements that have taken gun ownership as an essential part of their organising? I'm thinking about like the Black Panthers, for example, in Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, there's historical precedent of the left using firearms to win all the way back to like slave revolts and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily a central part of the organizing that we as an organization it is, but broadly on the left, I don't think it is, and I don't think it should be. I just think that as an organization, we need to specialize in this skill and this topic because it's just a role that needs to be filled. I think it's a skill to have in your back pocket and to better have it and not need it, especially with the right-wing organizing is centrally around guns and is centrally around hurting people and going after parts of our community. Even if you're some leftist who believes that they're going to really make the biggest change in the world and going after like international capitalism, and you start making headways, historically, they just kill those people. If you think you're going to have a revolution and it's going to be a peaceful one, like you're probably going to lose. I'm not advocating for violence. I'm not advocating for some overthrow of the government. I just want people to be able to defend themselves from people who want to do them harm.
One aspect of that is community defence. I think it's interesting to think about the different forms that can take. One form might be a kind of particular response to, for example, the far-right march. After Trump was elected the first time, we saw big marches, right? Sort of neo-Nazi marches, people waving unapologetically swastikas in the air. You can oppose that in a sort of an armed way, or you can have a sort of more distributed inside the community kind of opposition to essentially hate crime that might accelerate. How do you see the different roles of firearms in those two different cases? Because they feel quite different to me.
Yeah. Firearms and protest usually are not a good mix. People are deciding to be armed at a protest. We generally say, well, one, you have to abide by your state laws and your local laws. There's laws around like open carry and things like that. So first off, check up on those laws wherever you are. Second, if you do decide to carry and it's legal in your area, concealed carry, you can have a permit for that. And don't be an instigating actor. Be a person that's willing to look out for people who are going to show up at a protest and potentially have like a mass shooting scenario. We don't recommend that like people show up with guns or act in some sort of militia way. You know, the SRA is not a militia. We're an education organization. We've had a couple scenarios where we've had different far right, like just fascist groups and rebranded Nazis essentially show up with flags. And the city of Philadelphia shows up and beats the shit out of them every single time. There weren't guns involved. There's a lot of martial arts and MMA and Muay Thai happening in the city, especially in leftist spaces, which we encourage. We have a lot of members who practice Muay Thai. When you have these incidents of fascism showing its face like this, or hate crimes, the best way to kind of repel that is to just get out in the streets and just show that they are outnumbered and they're not welcome. You don't need a gun to do that.
Right, it's outnumbered, but not necessarily outgunned.
Yeah, I think if there's the subtext that like, you know, these people are armed, it's usually a deterrent. I'm thinking back to Katrina, where there's different groups that came down to do outreach there, and there were Nazis in the street shooting bystanders down, and they showed up with guns. There wasn't a gunfight, but just the fact that they had guns and they knew that they would use them to defend themselves, they kind of fucked off. So.
I've never seen an assault rifle before. Mm-hmm. Here we have two.
Yep.
And what's the difference between them? Like, why have two?
So this I bought kind of during COVID. It was kind of cheap, and the ammo was cheaper at the time. When Russia invaded Ukraine, a lot of the sanctions dried up the ammo. Some of those companies moved over out of Russia, but there's not a lot of stateside ammo for like AKs. Mm-hmm. And then, so I bought that when it was
cheaper. This is an AK-74?
47.
47, so this is the classic, this is the most widespread rifle in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think so what happened, as far as I understand it, the Soviets gave AK-47s to huge numbers of communist movements globally, mm-hmm. and then they got sort of distributed into populations. So for example, the Viet Cong had a huge number of them. Mm-hmm. In East Africa, there's loads of them.
There's even more, like, there's a whole subset of like gun nerdery that you could go into about AK-47s, because beyond just giving out the guns themselves, they gave out the manufacturing plans. So like there's a lot of different like variants that, you know, from an untrained eye, it looks like an AK-47, but some like small parts might not work together, and like some of the tolerances don't work. You can tell by like some of the rivets, it's a big thing that you could get into. So AKs in the US are very much more of like a boutique item these days.
There's a really good book by Christian Parenti called Tropics of Chaos, mm-hmm. and it's about the way in which violence spreads in particular cultures through the Cold War, basically. So his thesis is that, particularly in East Africa, between Eritrea and Ethiopia, lots of guns are sort of dumped into the environment by America on the one hand, mm-hmm. that's funding the sort of the ruling class, and then the communists in Russia give money, give rifles as well to the Communist Party there. This ultimately leads to a situation where people just have guns, mm-hmm. right, all the time. Can you talk to us about the sort of the history of guns in the US? Like, why is it that the United States has so many guns, and like, how did they get here?
That's a really big topic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, originally it was really for only white people to have guns in this country, and if you were not like a landowning elite, you weren't even allowed to have like other forms of weaponry. I think there's laws around black people owning dogs because they could be considered a weapon at a certain point. I think the history of gun ownership is kind of inexplicably tied to the genocide of the Native Americans. And the culture has changed a lot throughout the years. So even in the last like 20 or 30 years, right-wing gun culture has changed a few times over, especially with like kind of the laws affecting it. You have a lot of people who come home from wars and just enjoy shooting guns, because the capitalist class likes to just throw the working class into the meat grinder, and then they end up liking guns.
This is the thesis of Kathleen Bellu's work on white power, is that far-right movements bloom in the aftermath of wars of people sent abroad, mm-hmm. Particularly in the US. That means in the 1980s, there was a huge explosion of what we might call the white power movement, of people who are veterans, or at least pretend to be veterans of the Vietnam War, and that sort of trauma comes home with them as well. Is that something that you see in the far right now? People who are organizing on the right, there's that sort of war trauma there? Is that from Iraq or Afghanistan?
I think there's some of that. What I see more of, though, is people pretending to be those people and like dressing up like a Navy SEAL or something, and kind of copying the kit that they have to kind of like play soldier at the range. There's also a lot of like glorification of these vets, because there used to be a culture where these vets wouldn't really show their face around the work that they did, or wouldn't glorify it in some like public way. But there's been a lot of books and podcasts and of stuff, and vets coming out talking about their experience and being like, yeah, we did that and I'm proud of it, which kind of leads to the general public kind of glorifying war and certain aspects of the military.
You offered training. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me what you do? And could you maybe offer that training to me now, as someone who's never seen a rifle in person?
Yeah. So the trainings that we offer is we have a fundamentals class. We have two. So fundamentals 1.0 is about all the legal landscape around guns in Pennsylvania. Even just like a short throw over the river in New Jersey, the laws are drastically different. So a lot of legal considerations, safety things around storage. We talk a lot about mental health, how to like be aware of your mental health, how to be aware of your friend's mental health. And then we talk about how ammunition works, how the guns work, how to source guns like responsibly. I mean, I say that like if people are commonly buying black market guns, but that's like not really the case. From there, we talk about range etiquette. So how to like behave at a range, how to dress safely for the range and do that, all that kind of stuff.
You go to ranges that are public ranges?
Public and private, yeah.
Yeah, and the public ranges are also frequented by people on the right, so sort of right-wing militias as well. Can you talk about these interactions there?
Some ranges are a little more fashy than others. There's been some ranges where people are bragging about joining the border patrol. There's a lot of ranges that are like swarmed with like cops and state police and things like that. And then you have like your run-of-the-mill like militia people who, you can kind of tell who it is. They're not necessarily wearing the flag literally on their sleeve, but you can kind of tell. We also monitor a lot of their streams and like Telegram channels and stuff. And so,
what do you find?
That they complain about people who aren't like cis white men going to shoot. And there's been a couple times where they like talk specifically about someone that we know. So we try to keep it pretty low profile.
And your organization is not mostly cis white men. Who is in the SRA?
So it's a lot of queer and trans folks, a lot of LGBT and union people, a lot of LGBT union people. But to be fair, there are a lot of cis white men in the chapter. I think because historically it's been gatekept from people who aren't cis white men, and we're hoping to change that. One of the biggest shifts in demographic that we've seen, especially since the election, is a lot more women are signing up, and kind of a steady stream of trans people are signing up.
Can you show me how to do the safety thing?
Yeah. So let's start with the handgun. So there's actually a lot more laws around handguns in the US than these rifles. I think that surprises people the first time they hear about it because these are on the news all the time, but much more crime is done with handguns than with rifles. So I think a lot of the solutions around like gun crime as it affects like everyday people is more to do with addressing poverty and material conditions than actual gun laws. So first rule of gun safety is always treat a gun as if it is loaded. Don't assume that it's unloaded, so you want to check and clear the chamber. So in here you'll see that there's a little hole and there's nothing in there. So we check that the gun is safe. You want to always keep a gun pointed in a safe direction. Don't point at anything you don't intend to shoot. So right now I'm keeping it safely pointed in one direction. I'm also not, third rule of gun safety, sticking my finger in here and pulling the trigger and things like that. And then the fourth rule of gun safety is know your target and what lies beyond it. So you don't want to be shooting into the dark and not knowing what you're hitting. And if you are shooting at something, you want to know what lies beyond it because the bullets are just going to keep going. So we cover a lot more in depth in the class, but as far as like manual safeties, how to operate them, a lot of modern handguns, like anything made after the 80s, don't have like a safety on them. A lot of guns will have like a blade safety or something, or internal safety to make sure that they don't go off from like dropping them.
Can you show me how to grip it? Can I hold it? Is that right?
Yeah, so just keep it pointed down that range. So as far as like a proper grip, you want to hold all three fingers and have like one finger forward. And then with your support hand, kind of put your palm into here. And then really the secret to pistol shooting, because it's a lot harder than rifle shooting, your support hand is going to grip harder than your right hand. So that way, if you're squeezing, it's not going anywhere. And when it cycles, it just returns back on sight. So in here, we have like, this is the lower receiver. This is the only actual part that's considered the firearm. So you can basically buy this metal chunk that houses the trigger at a dealership and do the background check that has the serial number on it. And then everything else, like the trigger, the stock, the bolt, the whole upper receiver, since this kind of comes into two pieces, you can have shipped to your house. So that's kind of why people say like the or the AR platform is like so modular. Some people call it Legos, because you just buy one part and then you can kind of slap on anything you want.
We were talking about the way in which the practice of war fighting changes gun culture. So certainly it traumatizes lots of people. They come back to the United States, then they get sort of stuck in this sort of culture of violence and so on.
Some of it.
How does that affect the actual weapons themselves? Like, how do these compare to the weapons that you might actually find in the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan?
Military grade just means the cheapest that the military could get that meets their standards. So like it's way easier to get guns that are higher standard and higher spec than a military gun. A lot of the innovation doesn't come from the military, it actually comes from like the competition shooting scene, because they're allowed to tinker with their guns and improve things. So a lot of things like this type of sight, which is called an LVPO or low powered variable optic, that can zoom from 1x all the way up to 6x, that's a new thing. This is what's called a piggyback, having an extra optic on top.
Can I hold it? Is that right?
Yeah. So obviously there's no ammo in it, but you're still practicing gun safety, keep it down range. So
it's not as heavy as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
it is pretty heavy, but it's not like incredibly heavy.
Yeah, and it doesn't recoil a whole lot. People think it's going to be some sort of cannon, and it's pretty pleasant to shoot.
Oh, I can see. Yeah. So what's the advantage of having one of these as opposed to having the AK, which you bought before?
Yeah. The AK is pretty not very practical. One, there's limitations with 7.62 by 39 beyond just the price. It drops off faster. It's slower. It's affected by wind a lot more at distance, and there's more recoil for not that much more performance. The other thing is that the ergonomics on them aren't as good. So earlier I was saying I can pretty much handle everything with like one hand here. I'm gonna put this down. Here, even just to charge it, I have to like break my grip, come back around, work with this. The safety is like, this is a more modern thing, is having a finger safety here. It used to be that you have to like kind of break your grip and come up like that. If you see the line from the barrel all the way down to the stock, it's not a straight line, whereas in the AR it is. So the recoil is gonna have like a sort of different direction, and the way the stock is set up now, you can get like a million different stocks for this, but you kind of have to be closer in and hunched over, and you're kind of looking through your eyebrow, whereas this is much more heads up shooting, and it's a lot more comfortable, and you don't fatigue as easily.
The AK-47 is in some ways a classic gun, but it's not actually so widely feared anymore. Obviously, in the Cold War, it was the gun of the Soviets and so on. But the AR-15 is like a classic all-American weapon. But it's also very controversial. There was an attempt to ban specifically this platform.
Yeah.
Why is that? And like, what is so controversial about it, and what do they get wrong in that controversy?
So it's the most common rifle in America. So when these like terrible incidents happen, it's probably going to be with an AR-15 just because of how cheap they are to produce.
We're talking school shootings, we're talking also terrorist attacks. So for example, the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand was actually conducted with an AR-15 as well. Yeah,
and I think the kind of gap in knowledge is pretty representative in the difference between this and say what's called like a Mini 14, which is kind of like a hipster's AR-15. It's an older version of a similar gun, or it fit a similar role to this in the military. It shoots the exact same round. It has the same exact like impact or like effect downrange, but because it's made out of wood and it looks old, people don't really pay a lot of attention to it. There have been some attempts to ban the AR-15, but it's without getting rid of the Second Amendment, it's going to be a lot harder to do, especially like it'd be like trying to ban the like Toyota Corolla or something. Like there's just a lot of them, and you can't really just do that. The attempt that they have made is to do like featureless stuff. So you're like getting rid of like certain features, like a pistol grip, which is just this, doesn't make the gun more deadly. It makes it more comfortable to shoot. It makes it easier to shoot, which is probably safer than a gun that's harder to shoot, to be less accurate with. For some reason, telescoping stocks, something like this, scares people. I don't know why. It's just like, if you're smaller, you bring it in. If you're larger, you bring it out. It doesn't change how this gun works. It doesn't like stop it from being semi-automatic. Every single gun, unless it's a bolt action rifle or a pump action shotgun, is semi-automatic. It's not really addressing the issues. It's like addressing a lot of feelings, very valid feelings that people have, but it's not really practical.
Do you think that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun? Right? This is an NRA talking point, but in some ways, like, that feels like maybe there's some sort of overlap there with your strategy.
I think there's so much like baggage attached to that statement. It's like, I don't think so. I think there obviously is a handful of cases of people stopping mass shootings with their concealed carry gun. They're not hopping out of their car with one of these. And typically when they say good guys with the gun, these are people who like the police, and then the police don't do anything when there's a mass shooting either. They're a bunch of fucking cowards, honestly.
You mentioned the Second Amendment a moment ago and the possibility of repealing it, right? That's not really a thing that anyone thinks is going to happen. There was certainly some conspiracy theories back in the Obama presidency that Obama was going to repeal the Second Amendment and this kind of thing. The same is also true of the Biden. Of course, this happens every time a Democrat is elected. The Republicans think that's going to happen. There are some arguments that the Second Amendment is written at a time when AR-15s didn't exist, but also an organized national police force didn't exist. And that it's really a provision for militias. It's really a provision for local law enforcement at a moment in which America didn't have that in a much more sort of organized way that it has now. Is there a case for repealing the Second Amendment? Because that would lower the temperature of violence or lower the capacity for violence in the country quite substantially, no?
I think any attempt for attacking or repealing the Second Amendment is going to stroke more violence than anything, because there's so much of an identity to it. Maybe in a world where we can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, like we can get to that point where we're having a more sober discussion around these things. That being said, it's a document written by slaveholders. They didn't really have a lot of things in mind when they were writing the Constitution. And I think what it really comes down to is everybody has the right to defend themselves. So if that means guns, if that means martial arts, if that means mace, these are things that you need to know how to use if you choose to have that responsibility.
Are you worried about a civil war?
I think it's a topic of discussion. I think most of that talk comes from the right, and the way that we talk about it, at least in the SRA, is more of like, how do we respond if these people start trying to pull stuff? I don't think it'll be like a civil war like the first time, or necessarily like even as bad as like stuff during the Troubles. But I do see...
The Troubles in the North of Ireland.
Yeah. But that's kind of what people most likely kind of use as a reference point, is like small targeted things where different groups rub up against each other. I think the more that the government gets kind of divided, I think Trump is going to be pretty antagonistic to a lot of different parts of the government, and different forms of the government might coalesce around like either pro-Trump or anti-Trump, however that looks, and then you have certain areas that are like more hostile than others. But I don't know. I think a real civil war would have to come down to like food and water and like mass homelessness to like really kick off, because I think people just want to feel comfortable, and they feel really comfortable, and they don't really want to do this. I think a lot of it is posturing to try to whip up people, and then you'll have crazies that might actually do something, and then some of those crazy band together and make a militia. So,
but there is a broader question here about violence in the American politics, right? It is a very violent culture. In some ways, the kinds of things that are threatened by the far right, and perhaps even by you, is sort of escalation of that violence. The violence is really bad. Like I'm going to come down against violence, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like the argument that I will sort of put to you is that by organizing around weapons, that you make the threat of that escalation more substantial.
I think that damage has already been done, and it hasn't been done by us. I mean, even going back to like what you mentioned about the like Black Panthers organizing around guns, it's come from a need of necessity. If we didn't need them, we wouldn't have them, or if we didn't feel unsafe, we wouldn't have them. Like I was saying, a lot of our memberships are trans people who are just trying to live a regular life and who are attacked on a daily basis. That being said, we do always preach de-escalation. We do say, like, you know, a gun's not the most practical in every situation. You know, usually pepper spray is, if you can get away with that. In certain places, you're not allowed to have pepper spray. But,
are you in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So this is really a last resort, but you can't really own a gun without the accompanying knowledge and skills. And so that's really what we're here for, is to fill that gap. We're not necessarily leading the left. We're not trying to like tell people what to do, but we are just saying, here's a specialized skill, and if you choose to have this responsibility, we will help you like be safe and like competent with these.
A month after the election, Luigi Mangione allegedly shot Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, 3 times in the back, killing him. Since then, the question of guns and the left has become even more relevant in the United States. There was something very surprising about the way in which Luigi allegedly shot Thompson. He used a ghost gun, which is a kind of gun that doesn't have a serial number and therefore can't be traced. Some number of these guns are also made in unconventional ways, for example, being 3D printed, using a 3D printer you can buy at home with files downloaded from the internet. In a country with more guns than people, it's a strange choice to say the least. This wave of 3D printed guns was started by crypto-anarchist Cody Wilson in 2013, who uploaded the first gun called the Liberator to the internet. Using these guns, downloading them, and of course firing them are extremely illegal pretty much everywhere. But this is the new condition that advocates for gun control have to reckon with. The means of distributing violence have become increasingly decentralized, untraceable, and unstoppable. And what are the neo-Nazis up to? Well, just a few days after we filmed this video, a group of masked men walked down the street in Columbus, Ohio, waving swastikas, as they will do many times over the next Trump presidency, not just there, but across the United States. If you've enjoyed Novara's America coverage and want to help us make more and become even better in 2025, please go to novaramedia.com/support. And if you want to hear more interviews with me, you can listen to Novara FM on the Novara Media podcast feed, available wherever you get your podcasts.